Molly, when we get to the book of Hosea, things get weird fast, right? It's like the very first words of the book of Hosea, aside from the little introduction that sets us in our time and place, is when the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go, take for yourself a wife of whoredom and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord." So he went and took Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Now, there are metaphors, and then there's go actually marry someone and have a kid as a metaphor. And like, is it a little much?
I mean, I think for sure it's a little much. We can see this in the context of prophetic symbolic action is a thing.
Sure.
Right. So other prophets take these sort of extreme actions.
Walk around with a yoke.
Exactly. And like Ezekiel has that loincloth, which is pretty out there.
But lie on their side for 3 years or whatever it is.
However, this one is particularly troublesome in that it's not just what the prophet does with the prophet's own body, but really implicates apparent, if we take this as historical, this woman and her children who are, from the very beginning portrayed as whatever this word zanut means in this particular case, a prostitute, somehow sexually immoral, improper, all as this elaborate metaphor for the religious infidelity of Israel to Yahweh. So it is indeed very troubling. And it for later communities reading these texts, it has been very problematic, right?
Yeah. We talk a lot when we read the Bible about like we call the marriage metaphor, right? Which is, Yahweh as like, and Israel as his wife, and Israel's infidelity, right? Israel is worshiping other gods, or like thinking about worshiping other gods, or checking out some other deities, and then that's the prevailing metaphor for that relationship. This is this extreme, like real world, tangible, like metaphoricizing of it. And as you suggest, right, if we take it as historical, right, there are bodies they're implicated here. Chapter 2, which is not sort of is not about like what's happening to actual bodies, but is this message, about using the marriage metaphor, which I think shows a sort of potential for destructiveness or cruelty in a different way, right? This is a chapter in which, God talks about how He is going to treat the infidelity of Israel, and how He's going to treat Israel. So, I will strip her naked. I will expose her as the day she was born. I will make her like a wilderness. Upon her children I will have no pity. Their mother has played the whore. I will hedge up her way with thorns. I'm just sort of, my eye is skipping around. There's just so much here. And then, right, I will uncover her shame in the sight of her lovers. No one shall rescue her out of my hand. I will put an end to all her mirth. I will lay waste. I will punish. All of which is terrible. And then somehow it actually gets worse, because what comes after that is like, and then she will be so desperate that she will like cry out, and I'll take her back in love, and she won't do it again.
I mean, this is really the language of domestic abuse. It is God as abuser.
It's not even language, it's almost the paradigm. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is the kind of thing that we still see. This is typical, archetypal even. And here it is. I mean, this is, nearly 3,000-year-old stuff, and it is so true to the form of abuse. It's shocking just on those grounds. But the fact that this is biblical, and we could condemn all day long, but it's in there, right? This is in Scripture. This has been, for better or worse, I think, and I would be fascinated to see some study of this somewhere, but this, it seems to me, has been the model text for individuals and communities of faith to think about how do we treat the cheating spouse, wife, I should specifically wife. Right?
Yes. Yeah, it brings up all kinds of questions about we can say that the text is patriarchal and has these ideas of, the woman has no control over her sexual agency, does not get to decide. The man can control, the husband can control her body, can prevent her, right, shut her in, prevent her from going anywhere, take away her freedom. And then still expect a relationship with her, a sexual relationship with her when he decides that he wants one again. And so the question is really what communities do with this. And there's no question, I think, that it has been used historically. If nothing else, through reading this, people in communities that read this text as scripture get this impression that this is God doing this. So this is like, surely it's okay if God is doing it, right? And more specifically for women who have experienced domestic abuse, this text is just impossible, right? And so it is a real case. It really brings to the fore how communities need to they need to think about these questions and understand the ways that texts affect members of the community and the ethics of the texts, and I even call out the text, even though it is scripture, to say these are not values that can be accepted by anybody.
Yeah, this is a hard chapter to read and have the phrase like the good book
Indeed.
in one's head, right. But it also, one could just say skip it, but that's not really doing justice to the fact of it either. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's very tough stuff. So
what do you do? What is your take on how, not in a sense of how particular communities should deal with the text, because that's up to individual communities, but is there a sense in which we try to understand the logic or some kind of sense of what is going on in this text? How do we understand it intellectually while condemning it ethically and saying this is terrible, but it's a piece of ancient literature, so how do we engage with it other than saying this is horrible?
Stay away. Yeah. So I will admit there was a time, I think, in my life where I would have said, well, we want to situate it in the sort of the ethical constraints of its time and place, right? This was a patriarchal text, right? It's a patriarchal time. Here's how women were thought of as property, et cetera, and all those things, and sort of give it that kind of context. And I think I suppose that's still important to do. But I feel like at the same time, that's almost apologizing for it. As if back then everybody would have been totally okay with treating women this way, except the women, presumably. To say, well, that was okay back then because it was a different time and place. And I realize that might not be what we're going to say, but that sort of gesturing in that direction, I think, makes it somehow okay to say. Makes it seem like, it could be okay now if we were just all okay with it.
Well, I think I was actually pushing in almost a different direction, which you're right. I absolutely did not want to simply say it's ancient, they were all terrible,
Yeah.
Therefore it's okay. But if you think about how this is being used as a metaphor for God's, because the thing about Hosea in comparison to something like Amos, where God is much more sort of, military, separate, the horror of Hosea's language is that God is imagined as an intimate relationship.
Yeah.
And it's not just, and there's also later in the book, it becomes a sort of parent language, out of Israel I have called my son, right? Israel was a child in the wilderness and I loved him. So it's different imagery, another kind of intimate relationship. But the question that I actually was leading towards is, what does it mean that God is being imagined? That this is the language that's being used to imagine how Israel should relate to its God. So I think it's almost like worse, because it's not just about actual treatment of women or how people, endorsing abusive behavior or abusive language, but like glorifying it in that this is the metaphor that's used to describe this relationship between Israel and its God.
Yeah, I mean, it's deeply problematic, and it's the whole first 3 chapters, right? It's like the first chapter is we talked about, the second chapter we just talked about, and the third chapter is like another one. It's another sort of another one of these like real world metaphor gestural things. And yeah, that whole as an opening of a prophetic book, and in fact, as the very first thing one reads when one opens the Book of the 12, right? We're talking about them in the sort of more historical order, but canonically, this when you open the Book of the 12 as if anyone does. Right. But when we think about this collection, this is like
it's the lead off, right?
It's the very, very first thing, and it. The marriage stuff runs throughout, not just here. It's also obviously it's in Isaiah, it's in Ezekiel prominently, it's in Lamentations, it's all throughout. But it's a real bang of a way to start. But it's not the whole book. Right. You mentioned this sort of allusion later on to finding Israel in the wilderness. And it's interesting to think about. Hosea is a book that seems to be more familiar with, or at least engage more with, sort of our well-known traditions. The Exodus is in here. Jacob is in here. But here, the one you were referring to here at the beginning of chapter 11, when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. And then, like, in the next breath, the more I called them, the more they went from me. They kept sacrificing to the Baals and offering incense to idols. So you've got 2 things going on here. We've got this, as you said, the shift to a parental metaphor, where, quite frankly, again, you're basically going to get language of, like, discipline.
Discipline, abuse, control, yes.
Yeah. But also sort of a historical sense that we don't find, for example, really in Amos. What do we make of that? Or, I mean, I don't think either of us would say, oh, well, they must have been reading Exodus.
Right.
Right.
I mean, I do like Hosea again is situated in the northern kingdom and shows knowledge of these early traditions that also biblical scholars have said, oh, this seems like there was kind of a set of traditions that were emerging specifically in the northern kingdom, and you can see some of these in the book of Deuteronomy, which is also often associated in its early versions with the north somehow, whatever that means, right? But you can start to see how traditions were known and interacted with, and we don't have to, that doesn't mean there was a book of Exodus, right?
Right.
But that this understanding of Israel as a people in relationship with its God and who had come from Egypt, like you can see the nuggets, the growth of that early tradition.
The cool thing here, I mean, for me as somebody who thinks these things are cool, but the cool thing here is this is one of these places where the biblical text, in this case Hosea, seems to have a clear sense of the beginning of Israel's existence or relationship with the deity is Egypt, right? If you read Hosea, it's
not Canaan,
right,
not Abraham,
not Canaan, right? Not Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, not the right, but there's a separate story, and I think at least that this is probably reflects a sort of reality of how these traditions grew. That there was an Exodus story in which it was like, oh, there was this people who was in Egypt, and this God came and saved them, and that's why they have this relationship. And when Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. But the interesting part of that is Hosea also knows Jacob. Right? So, like, as you said, right, it's nuggets, right? It's not yet a full-fledged story, at least not it's not a put together one. But we've got reference to Jacob and the angel just in the next chapter, right?
Right.
in the womb he tried to supplant his brother.
Yeah.
His manhood he strove with God. He strove with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. He met him in Bethel. I mean, that's a lot of the Jacob story in one
Indeed,
place.
yeah.
Hosea is a wonderful place. Once we get past the terrible, Hosea becomes a wonderful locus for thinking about Israelite traditions and how they get used. Right? These are not just stories. Right? These are stories that the prophet is then transforming into a message.